inventory where countries are using tier 3 methods and models. So I think this is really an important issue to consider. The question is that all methods have to follow the fundamental principles of the IPCC and the UNFCCC. So they need to be transparent, accurate, consistent, comparable, and complete. And I think for models and the use of tier 3 methods, this issue of transparency is absolutely key. And it came up in, I think, all of the presentations today. And what is transparent enough? And generally, when we think of transparency, we think of the ability to reproduce an estimate. But you can't reproduce a model, and you certainly can't do it in a review. And reviews can happen, it's important to say reviews can happen centralized in Bonn, or they can happen in country. And really, models can really only be reviewed well in country, I think. You need to be able to talk with the experts and see. I think I wasn't allowed to have a presentation, but I have a model of the IPC, the Sydney report. I think this is a useful report. It provides specific parameters that should be included for transparency in the NIR. And this was adopted by the UNFCCC. So reviewers are looking, when they look at models, to see if countries are reporting on like the basis of the model. The assumptions, we talked about the assumptions, the inputs to the model. In cases where the models were developed from other countries and applied to the circumstances, as was the case of the Century model in Japan, like, has the party described how the model has been applied to the national circumstances of their country? I think these are all very important elements. So I would encourage people to look at this Sydney report, because this has been adopted by the UNFCCC as well. I think also, it's not, once you have transparency, then the reviewer can go to the next level and they can assess whether it's accurate or not. And we've talked about some of the different ways of assessing the accuracy of models. Countries are required, developed countries are required to verify if they use tier 3 models. They're required to verify those models. And that can be done, you can be done looking at a lower tier method. But I think, as Sushi's point is right, they may not have comparable results, and that may be okay, because models should better reflect the circumstances. You can look at other independent assessments, peer-reviewed literature. There's multiple ways to verify models. But providing that kind of verification either in the NIR, the inventory report, or through a cross-reference, I think is helpful for transparency. And so that's getting at the accuracy question. Comparability is important to look at. A lot of models are made or developed for other purposes, and so they have to meet the IPCC requirements or the methods. They have to, for example, separate mineral soils and organic soils. I think there are some models out there that don't do that. When sometimes models just estimate the emissions, but they don't actually give you the necessary data for reporting, the underlying activity data. I've seen that in the case for harvested wood products for our country. So that's something to look at, to make sure that the model can still report the kind of information that you want for reporting. Consistency is important. I think models help with consistency because they're used over time, but you still have to ensure that the input data to the model are consistent, making sure that you don't have two different sources of data over time, or if you do, that you can ensure that the estimates, fluctuations in the estimates are real and not an artifact of the underlying activity data. Completeness, does the model cover the whole inventory? And if not, how are you estimating those emissions outside of the model? This is also important actually for tier 3 methods, very important when you're doing bottom-up facility level estimates to make sure that they cover all of the country. I think I got all of the TACCCs. So I guess, final point I would say is that reviewers are taught, in their training, there is a course on the use of complex models in inventories. And so that's something that we would encourage reviewers to use. It's an optional course, but I think it's a very important one because of the complexity. And you'll understand then some of these questions of how to in practice apply the TACCC. So yeah, I think
that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, very much. And I'm not going to say that every time I asked, during the review, has the UK followed up, the requirements? They overloaded my box That's the transparency issue that we are talking about. We never know what is enough and what is not. Bonjour. Okay, so you were in the capacity building, of the UNFCCC. My question is all like this. How, if you have to capacity building, especially to developing countries, I don't know if you would start with a tier 3 approach. And then if you would, how would we take into account the specificities of each country in terms of data